Kia ora tātou, kia ora tātou katoa, kua tatu mai nei ki tēnei hui. Heretaunga Takoto Noa mo tēnei rangi. Mihi nei kia tātou katoa, kua whai wahi mai nei ki tēnei hui. Tinana, ipurangi rānei, no reira tēnā tātou. I tā tātou nei kaupapa tēnei rā. Hoi no, hei whakatūwhera pai tā tātou nei hui, kei te tuku nātu nā te rākau kōrero ki a koe, uncle, mā hau te karakia e whakataki, me te mihi whakatau anō hoki. No reira ki a koe.
Kia ora henare, tēnei tu timatatanga mo tēnei tō tātou hui, kei te himene, tuatahi. Tō mātou matu I te rangi, kei te tūmai ki tēnei tō pono tāroaro mō tēnei wa. Kei te timatatanga te tēnei tō tātou hui, kei te kapi he whakaputu. E whai haere te huarahi e pai te kōrero mō tēnei wa. Pai ki tēnei manaakitanga, tēnei te kai whakahaere o tātou hui mō tēnei rā. Manaakitanga kei te kotahi tata, kei runga te kaupapa, I ngā take I ngā tono mō tēnei wa. Te whakaro rei ki a koe he pā, ki tō manaakitanga, I te māwiwitanga, e ngā kaumātua, whakake, tamariki, ngā mokopuna hoki. Kei roto ta hoi pera, te kāinga, te marae, piki te kā, piki te ora, piki te māramatanga he pā. Te rātau e noho ki te hauri, te mamai, moke ki a rātau, ka wehe atu, manaaki e tieki. Te rātau I ngā wā katoa. No reire pā, kōrenge I ngā kōrero mō tēnei rā, ki te kaupapa o tātou hui, manaaki he tieki I ngā wā katoa. No reire pā, ki tau te rangi Māori, o tēnei tō tātou hui, ko Ihu Kraiti, kai whakahora, ake, amene. Kia ora tata.
Kia ora no tātou. Tikana kia mihi a koe ako. A koe rā, ko tūtui mai te rangi me te whenua. Te kauaka tuku o tātou ne whakaaro ki te wāhi ngaro. Nō reira tēnā koe i o karakia. Whakatūwhera i tēnei hui ngā tātou i tēnei rā. Mihi nei kia koe, Sandra, koro matua. Ko hara mai nei, ki tēnei huihuinga. O tira kia koe, Robin, hea mana o tēnei komiti. Ko tukuna te poro kia hau mo tēnei rangi. Kia ora he hoa. Hoi no koau ko Baden, Baba, koau te hea mana tuarua. Kei te whakahaere nei tēnei huihuinga mo tēnei rā. So just welcome everyone here to our meeting today. This is being televised or live streamed. So, yep, kia ora mō tēnā. We have some apologies or late apologies for our hui. So, Tanya Eden will be coming in at 2, Mike Paku at 1:30, and the rest of us are here, I think. So, yeah, ka pai, kia ora tātou. And Niall, Tuika's running a little bit late, so he'll be in as well. So we've had our karakia, those are the apologies.
Just a point of clarification, Chair. I'm the alternate, and I see we've got 6 councillors plus myself here. I'm just wondering whether I can participate in discussion, or not, and I know that I can't participate in voting, being the alternate.
Yep, if the committee's fine with that, we can agree to that. Are people okay with that? Any objections to Councillor Corbyn being in the hui and in the discussion? Kariko? Okay, so...
Thank you.
Yep, ka pai. Alrighty, item 3, conflicts of interest. If there are any, just raise them the normal way. Item 4, confirmation of the minutes from the 24th of November 2021. Do we have are people happy with those minutes? If so, can I get a mover? Councillor Redstone, and seconder, mai wai e tuarua, Councillor Travers. Koutou e whakai ki mai ai. Any e whakaheanga, any against? Karikau, ka pai, carried. Item 5, e tuku nei te rākau ki a koe, Dr. James, mō tō reporter. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, kei te he mana o tō tātou hui hei te ahi hei. Tēnā nō koe Papa Jerry, tō tātou pā whakawairua, nā hau i tau iho ai ngā manaakitanga ki te rongarawa, nā hau anō i tūhono ai. Tātou ki te whenua, ki te rangi ki te whenua. Kia koe hoki, te koromatua Sandra, koutou ngā kai kaunihera, tātou o Heretaunga Takoto Noa, tēnā rā tātou. Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, just a brief update from our team. I realise there are other agenda items that are part of our team's brief as well, but just firstly, tuatahi, ka mihi tēnei ki a koe kei te hea mana Robin, i a koe mau tonu nei ngā kākahu taratara i tēnei wā tonu. Nō reira e tikana ki a mihi ake ki a koe, me te wehenga o ngā hākui, arā ko tō whaia, me tō whaia keke hoki, ngā uri o ngai te rangi koe anake, arā ko whaia titi hui, arāwa ko Tuida. Rāwa tahi, kua wehea ki te pō, i te huringhanga o te tauhau, Pākehā nei, o tira, ngā mate nunui kei wānginui a tātou i te haukainga o Heretaunga. Me tērā wahine anō te manu taiko e noho nei i rungi i tētahi o ngā komiti o te kaunihera ara ko Joella. Brown Tera, no reira, rātou katoa, ngā mate, kei wainganui ia tātou, he mai aroha, hako maringi no ngā roimata, I tēnei wā tonu, kei te whakaaro nei mātou, o te rā kia rātou, no reira rātou kia rātou ngā taumata rau, he anō anei tātou ngā kanohi ora, e hiko tonu nei te matua te whenua. So just through the chair of today's hui, to acknowledge those who have passed on amongst us, and in particular our chair Robin, his mother, who passed away at the start of the year, alongside her sister and our auntie as well, Te Wira Wātene, and also to acknowledge Joella, his passing at the end of last year. Joella sat on our Hastings District Council, Tangata Whenua Wastewater Joint Committee, and so our thoughts are with those whānau at this time, even though we're into March now, but because we haven't met since November, it is appropriate to acknowledge those. So just to, by way of update, there are a couple of items. The representation review is one of those items to be updated. And on February the 18th, here at Council, there was a local government commission hearing, and attended by Mayor Sandra Hazelhurst, Deputy Mayor Tanya Kerr, Chief Executive To'o Zavili, Nigel Bickle, Craig Cameron and myself and staff, alongside the appellant to HDC's proposal, the chair of the Flaxmere Planning Committee, and other members of the Flaxmere community who spoke at that hearing. We were informed at that time that the Local Government Commission will release all of their determinations, including Hastings and other councils around the Motu, on representation arrangements no later than April the 10th, 2022. And so by way of indication for us, the broad timeline, I guess, for the local authority elections are up there on the screen for you, whereby Friday, 15th July, candidate nominations open, the electoral roll opens. The 12th of August, those nominations close, as do the electoral rolls. The 16th to the 21st of September, voting papers will be distributed to electors on the respective rolls. The 15th September to the 8th is the voting period, and at 12 p.m. on the 8th, voting closes. And no doubt counting would have taken place at that time, but no later than 19th of October, the declaration of the result and public notice of results will be made. So that's a bit of an update for the committee in relation to the representation review, and just again to acknowledge those who contributed to the hearing on the 18th in terms of the work done behind the scenes, as well as face-to-face that day as well. So kia ora.
And if I can, through you, the Chair, just add very good hearing where the Local Government Commission were highly complimentary of the quality of the representation review carried out by Heretaunga, both in terms of the engagement, the process, the quality of the options, and it would be fair to say that nearly all of the conversation centred on the issue around representation for Pahara Kiki. And that was almost exclusively the whole tenor of the conversation, and at the Local Government Commission's instigation, why we had a wide range of people from Pahara Kiki, from the chair of the Planning Committee through to people that were invited in to talk to the Commission that had made submissions through the process.
Who's speaker 7 and 6?
Oh, 7.
Is that it? Oh, yeah. Might be some part-time.
And also, just for information at this juncture, because I know people will have received invitations and alike and agendas, but the Regional Collaboration Day is on Monday, March the 7th, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's an online forum. Proposed attendees are the Mayor's Chair across the region, Councillors, Māori committees, the Regional Planning Committee at HBRC, council executive staff and Te Kupinga staff as well. So I won't dwell too much on that. There's a broad agenda items there, some of which we've been engaged with and then we'll continue to be engaged with. So just to confirm that your invitation should have been sent out. And so, and I think also the same with the RMA reforms here, that really, I think with the collaboration day on Monday, which has just been recently set, we won't need to dwell too much on this kaupapa for now, but I know it was part of our workshop and it was said that we would follow up, but since the workshop, the Regional Collaboration Day has been established, where the RMA reforms, including the spatial planning, strategic spatial planning, kaupapa and the Natural and Built Environments Act will be discussed and no doubt debated at that hui. So, Te Tū Marae Te Mataua Māori is the Marae PGF fund that our district has been a part of. In October 2020, 21 marae across Te Mataua Māori, Hawke's Bay were on board at that time, $6.02 million. And the completion date for this particular phase of mahi is the end of this financial year, June 2022. What has the work involved? It has ranged from civil works, including car parks and driveways, painting, interior, exterior, all of those things there you can see, roofing, buildings and structures, lighting and electrical, window and door joinery, plumbing, drainage and gas, building and carpentry in relation to non-resource consentable building consent structures, landscaping, fencing and concrete pathways and flooring, and including repiling, grinding concrete floors, carpet and lino and vinyl. And just to also share that in terms of marae that have finished or been completed, there are 6 marae there. Mihiro, Taraia, Puke, Haurua, Hapia, Waimarama and Tangoio that have had their renovations that were scoped out completed. There are marae at various stages of under renovation at present. There from Runanga, Mōtio, Timikara, Pētane, Haungarea, Waipatu, Wharerangi, o Mahu, Kahuranaki, Mangaro, Korongata and Matahiwi. And Kohu Pātiki, while it says yet to start, have probably just started in the last week. So those are the marae who were involved in. And it's just a scope there of, a whare that had its cladding removed and then being reclad, painted window joinery fitted and so on. But yeah, that's around the Te Tū Marae ki Te Mataua Māori that I said will be aimed to be completed in June 2022.
Just to add to that, and I'll follow up with yourself, I'll just say that in terms of the Waimarama project, awesome, it was just fantastic. The workers were great. The team that have been looking after the project have been really good to work with. And the outcomes in terms of marae refurbish have been pretty stunning. So, once it's all finished, we can go and huri haere ngā marae and you'll see what a big difference it's made. Councillor.
Just a point of clarification, brother. I'm no longer the chair at Te Aringa, but they're in the system, eh? Are they in the system?
Mr. Chair, yes, so there are some marae who originally, by way of circumstances at the time, whether they were rules or timings, were unable to be a part of this kaupapa. But yes, by all means, we're certainly working with our partners at Te Puni Kokiri, Te Tai Whenua, Te Whanganui Arotu, Heretaunga, and Kanoa to work on the collaborations moving forward for those who were unable to participate at this first tranche of mahi.
So do you go to them or they come to you?
We collectively, the steering group,
Yes.
will be working internally to go back to the Kanoa in particularly with respect to those marae who weren't ready at the time to,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
kia ora. I'll just, I think our General Manager of Asset Management, Craig Hugh, is online to hand over to you, Craig.
Kia ora, James, and kia ora koutou katoa committee. This is just a really quick brain dump at a high level of all things i toro ngā wai. In the paper, it talked about the Water Services Bill. Just to clarify, so the Water Services Bill has passed and is now the Water Services Act. And that's the regulation that the new water regulator, Taumata Arawai, are enforcing. The bill that's sitting waiting to go to the House is the Water Services Entity Act, which I'll mention briefly. In terms of aspects that affect us at Council, but also our wider community and out through the marae and papakainga and all sorts of small supplies across our region, is there are a number of standards that Taumata Arawai have out for consultation. And as a region, we're pulling together a regional submission to it. It's fair to say Taumata Arawai as an organisation is still building their waka as they fly through the air, as Bill Bayfield, the Chief Executive, calls it. But there is quite a bit of feedback that we'll be giving, particularly from the learnings from the private supply investigations that the region's been doing. And I think I visited a couple of marae and so forth that the committee are involved with. Also at the moment, Ministry for Environment has out for consultation the National Environmental Standard for Drinking Water. And that's a review of an existing document. And what that does, it just looks to define the public health outcomes from a drinking water perspective into the RMA format. So it adds an additional lens around where this source collection water may be coming from to add a public health lens to the RMA format. DIA are still progressing along the lines for the government water services entity changes. The working group was due to report on the 28th and that's been delayed a week. But the working group that's reporting back to the Minister and then to Cabinet has a very narrow focus on just looking at the management and governance of government's proposal for their 4 large multi-regional entities. Once they report back to the Minister, it'll go through Cabinet and then work through the House. And a key point for our communities and us all to work through will be the select committee process to provide any input into whatever that ultimate proposal looks like. Regionally, one of the topics Robin had mentioned he'd like talked about is just where the region's at, and I think that will get probably more comprehensively covered at that regional hui on Monday that James mentioned. And as I mentioned earlier, we're coming near the end of our private supply investigation project across the 4 councils across Hawke's Bay, and the report's due in the next few weeks. James and I are just working through the plans around doing the reviews across, working through the point of entry into discussions with marae, and then also with our rural halls around using the $150,000 we've put aside that we were looking at focusing on doing assessments. But obviously we just need to work through the appropriate protocols to be invited on to the marae to see if they want to have an assessment done or not. As I said, government is still pushing on full bore in terms of the service delivery reform preparation, and the National Transition Unit is getting really active. They have a proposal in time to then also set up local establishment entities. So that would be 1 entity for each of the 4 proposed multi-region water services areas. But also looking at focusing quite strongly and setting up local working groups to gain local knowledge and to better inform the ultimate design. There's a lot of information, happy to talk one-on-one or separately, but also I'll send an email which has a link to some of the DI information, their timeframes, rather than traversing it here. So I'll send an email out to all members once I finish this discussion. Next slide, James. and not to expect you to read that, but that's just a sign of what the National Transition Unit, in terms of their work program, to be ready to set up water services entities by the end of June 2024. So they have a lot of work program. At council, we have I've brought on an additional resource just to help us manage, keep our business going, keep focusing on the mahi that we need to do, but also stay ahead as much as we can to make sure council's well placed in any change that comes. Kia ora, that's all me.
Kia ora, thanks Craig, and thanks Dr. Graham for that report. Is that you, Your Worship? Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. Just through you, Chair, I'm just wondering how Heretaunga Takoto Noa will be able to submit to this select committee on the three waters and the position of Heretaunga Takoto Noa and how that process will unfold.
So through you, Chair, yeah, I think it's a fantastic question, Your Worship. Obviously, at the moment, we are kind of assuming that in the next week we will see the report that Minister Mahuta commissioned from the working group that was established. And at this stage, there's still a bit of uncertainty about the timing of a response to that, the introduction of legislation. But I think the key point is at the point that we know what the shape of the proposed legislation is, and that there's some timing around the select committee process, we will need to sort of work with Heretaunga Takoto Noa around you know, what support to whether Heretaunga Takoto Noa wants to present you know, a position, or whether the iwi's taking a position. So that we'll just have to work through when we've got a little bit more certainty actually around the scope of the bill and the timing for the select committee process.
Kia ora.
Yeah, exactly.
What's going on?
It's just the nasal, it's not a pharyngeal. Yeah. Oh no, you wouldn't want to be doing those yourself, eh?
Hello.
Yeah, people coming out. Yeah.
We've gone on freeze, have we?
Sorry, we can see you and hear you, Māori.
Oh, okay. Apologies. Yeah, who's going to go first? You want to go?
Yep.
Well, okay. Well, I've got. Okay, kia ora. Thanks for that update, Craig, and for your report too as well, James. Because yeah, in response to, you know, I guess having to first of all just gobble that all up as it starts to come to us. I think my sense will be that we'll be taking an interest ourselves. You know, with I guess the Heretaunga Takoto Noa committee having, I guess, the soundboard of those back out in our communities have that opportunity to get themselves up to speed with all the sorts of things that we're unclear of at this point in time. So there's quite a bit of analysis around what that will contain, particularly the standards and what sort of iwi objectives that I've just seen on the chart as it flashed up there a moment ago. But no doubt in my mind, I think that there's going to be a response, particularly from Heretaunga. We'll likely join forces, as we probably did around some of the more high-level mahi that, for example, with the electoral commission, we facilitated, of course, Huia iwi. We'll have that conversation with some of our Taiwhenua PSG groups just to see how that will unfold, but it will need to take some form of responsibility from our end, no doubt. Niall's maybe thinking of the same thing too as well. So we'll probably have a catch up and chatter ourselves in terms of how we feel and see the this process actually rolling out. Might be a good sample indicator to actually then bring back into Heretaunga Takoto Noa. But it's a little bit going into the dark at the moment. But my sense of it is that we'll be inclined to respond as iwi or as separate type. I'm sure that we'll all come together. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Māori. Ka pai ho. Yeah, ora pai tēnā. Nāio.
Kia ora, Chair. I thought I'd better say something connected to my comment. It's crap, ignored advice. And that was in regards to the NES drinking water that MFE is doing. So there's all these moving parts, Taumata Arawai, DIA, MFE. So we started talking to MFE quite a while back, but they just had turnover of staff, breakdown, and basically why I say it's crap because we had this engagement and nothing was reflected in that discussion document. I know they had some other professional advice and nothing was, again, taken from that advice. They ignored it. And just quietly, I've spoken to somebody who was liaising on behalf of MFE, who's left MFE, and said, apologise to us for the output seemingly taking nothing on board we've talked about. So it's not a really good document. And in the meantime, there's Taumata Arawai is also, I think there's 7 drinking water standards, drinking water quality assurance rules, drinking water aesthetic values, the list goes on. So those submissions on that consultation is due 28th of this month. And we're looking at, so basically we'll be putting our own voice forward and try and get a draft ready to share with, obviously throughout Kahununu, with our Tai Whenua and other entities before that due date, again, like we did to the drinking water bill, but it takes a level of resources to, like a planner and somebody with experience. So we're looking at engaging 2 other, maybe 3 people to input it into that, and that's at our own costs with so much going on in that space. But also just my final comment is with registering marae and small network providers, which is the aim of Taumata Arawai, where previously they were registered with Ministry of Health, and now you have to register with Taumata Arawai. So there's about 10 marae in Kahununu that are registered, and Taumata Arawai want to transfer that registration from MOH over to Taumata Arawai. But looking into the detail, if our marae register or anybody registers before November this year, then there's a whole lot of liability and requirements that they have to get to. And if they haven't got the resources to get the water safety plans and etc., they're basically going to expose themselves. And if you register after that date, you get, I think, 3 more years to get up to speed. So unless there's a bunch of resources going to help our marae write those water safety plans and do what's required under that registration, my advice would be not to do it because you've got a shortened time frame, and to get your ducks in a row after November this year for marae. And I think it's incumbent on us to support our marae because everyone's worried about a whole range of things, let alone these new levels, these new requirements under this registration of taumata. So yeah, that's my 5 cents, and we'll be looking to share any draft sub we have, hopefully.
Kia ora, Nāio. Thanks for that advice, and yeah, certainly our marae don't want to be caught on the back foot, but from a National Three Waters Committee perspective, we've been putting well, they've got a strong Māori caucus on Taumata Arawai, and you know, and they need to be thinking about our marae. I know the chair. He's very aware of marae issues, and not to be whacking, you know, the big stick on our marae. You know, that's just not going to work. So he understands that, and so we need to build the capacity of our marae to be able to respond to these reforms, because they're going to struggle. They're going to struggle, definitely. Kia ora, Rob.
Kia ora, Baden. Me kia koutou. Firstly, thank you, Baden, for taking over chairmanship at short notice, with me not being able to get there. And thank you for your condolences, James. Thank you, Niall, for your commentary. In terms of update, Craig, you were talking about the project that we had undertaken regarding the review of private water supplies. And I just want to sort of respond to Niall, because part of our support of that project was really around identifying what the current state of play was with our respective maraes and those drinking water supplies. And it's certainly with a view to trying to ensure they have the wherewithal to get their systems compliant, because writing a whole lot of you must doesn't necessarily achieve compliance, because there's a whole lot of resourcing that goes along with drinking water maintenance and operation and so forth, which is the undercurrent to why these the legislative changes are being introduced. So I do look forward to the report that's going to be compiled, Craig, around what they found. And the other side to that is that, as chairman of Taranaki, we are getting courted by drinking water advisors, do I call them that, who want to provide us services on how we can improve our services, and we pay them, and he'll do the reports and things like that. So what I'm saying is that there's an opportunity, or is there now, for people to take advantage of a situation where we have to try and potentially comply when the resourcing, I think, in around whether you register before or after, either way, we're still going to need support to get our systems up to scratch. So I do want to have some information, Craig, from that project to be able to put a case to Te Aro Matawai around the level of support that could be required in Hawke's Bay. I think the other matter of the lease, or the entity C, I think, is what we were part of, and that may well be a conversation for Monday the 14th. But I was interested in knowing how far the collective position that all the councils were advocating, how far that had moved. Because the notion of having doing a submission in support of anything is really subject to what impact and what whether they're going to take any notice. Now, from what it appears, they're going to roll this legislation out one way or the other. So having a submission around whether the merits of it or otherwise is, I'm not quite sure who's got the energy and whether we've got the resources to be able to do that. And maybe Niall can further comment on that as to how we would be placed. But I know that from the various iwi perspectives, we had a look at what the impact would be for the, I'll just call us the Kahungunu Whānui, or the iwi in that entity C, and then Ngāti Pro and Apanui and everybody else who is going to be excuse me, wrapped up in this, and then what that process would look like. So, I think there's still some work to be done for us around that, because the reality is that are we going to invest a whole lot of effort trying to turn the Titanic around when it's already on course? And so our effort needs to be in how we can get most yardage out of the current situation as it stands. So anyway, that's my commentary around the three waters and so forth. just in terms of the marae stuff, James, thank you for the update. And I see Tanya is on board and so is Mike in regards to the taipuna. Look, there's some wonderful work that was achieved. You know, we've had our little own ups and downs at Kaurariki, so we're still on the list. But certainly, you know, acknowledgement to the effort that's gone in, long overdue for some of our marae in terms of, you know, just your whare there, James, around reclaiming, repiling and just upgrading those facilities, because they are, you know, let's just call them our museums. You know, they're cultural heritage sites of significance to our rohe and should be considered as such. So they should be, you know, treated in that way. And not only are they museums, but they're contemporary museums in that we get to apply our culture and conduct business in those same places. So just a word of thanks to those involved, and let's look forward to how that can be carried on in the future. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Rob. Good points that you raised around, I guess, you know, who has the capacity to respond on behalf of iwi to these reforms. Three Waters, RMA, Hauora, yeah, there's, and the rest of them. So, pātai pai tēnā. Craig, did you have a solution to what Rob was saying, or you got a...
Oh, if I had the solution, I could make a fortune. Just to clarify and partly respond, so just NIO, the way the legislation is written, if someone's registered under the old system, they are classed as registered under the new system. And that's one of the feedbacks that we're looking to push through. So particularly in terms of small supplies, the feedback that we're looking to push as a region in the initial draft, and I'll be looking to make sure it stays, is partly tamata ara-wise going for gold too quickly, because going for gold for the big suppliers is going to be hard enough, let alone small
providers of fit for purpose and what's required to get up to the space before, say, you know, putting the kind of heavy-handed regulatory implementing that. So.
Ka pai Noa. We'll take Tanya as our last question or comment, and then we're going to wrap this one up so we can head into our probably our take matua for tēnei hui. Kia ora, Tanya.
Oh, kia ora, Baden. Just a quick one from me, just in relation to, it's just more of a comment because I've missed the initial kōrero around the marae project and also around the water discussion. But I just wanted to say, and I've missed the question on who has the capacity to respond on behalf of iwi, and that's really good that that was raised, because we were in a health hui yesterday, and the PSGEs and Taiwhenua had some really, really strong messages for Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated, and they probably haven't been discussed in here at this forum, but I think it's really important to let everyone know that, you know, the voice isn't just Nikki, that there are other voices out there that need to be taken into consideration, especially around this water kaupapa. Secondly, just on, Craig mentioned around the marae assessments, and that I'm really keen to explore that with you, Craig, around the Rural Fund, that $30 million. We're now looking at another project that will lead on from our marae project around maintenance, repairs and maintenance. So if there's any chance of doing assessments for our marae and having repairs and maintenance programs put in place for every single marae, so we can once a year do the guttering, once a year do the roofing, and keep that momentum going, which we've built up over the last 12 months. That's really, really important to us. So Craig, if I can pick that up with you at outside this meeting, that'll be great. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Tanya. Thank you for that. So we'll leave it there, and we'll take the recommendation to receive the report. Got a mover there, and Councillor O'Keefe, and a seconder, and Councillor Redstone. If everyone's happy with that, ki mai ai. Any against? Ka pai, motion carried. Thank you, James, and awesome report, me hoa. So we're going to move into item number 6. And so this take has been well discussed in Wānanga for the last while. So we have this report here. We have a presentation, and then there are recommendations coming from our staff to the committee. So with that note, we'll hand it over to you, John, and our manuhiri on Zoom, and then we'll get into the discussion pre-decision. Kia ora.
Right. No. Thank you, Christine. Right. We could just move on to the next slide. Just to give a bit of background and position, this aerial photo shows pretty clearly what we'll be talking about today. You've got the outstanding natural feature, which is obviously the very top ridge area, and you can see it shown in the red there. The next area is the light blue, which is the outstanding natural landscape. And then right down the very bottom, you've got the significant amenity landscape areas. And just to give a bit of a positioning, you see those kind of white buildings, that is Craggy Range, and practically the edge of the significant amenity landscape area runs along Waimarama Road. I guess the present operative plan, these are the present prediction mechanisms for Temata. So outstanding natural and cultural landscapes and features, significant amenity landscapes, building prohibition at 250 metre contour, so that's right up the top there. Earthworks controls in ONFL, and I guess when you look at the existing controls, they really haven't been enough to protect the escarpment. So what more can we do? Sorry, Christine. What are we trying to protect? The cultural values, the Waitahu, Waitanga, Waiatua, and the landscapes and visual attributes of this area. And I guess how are we going to protect them? Obviously, the suggestions about the lowering of the prohibition line to a couple of locations, reducing the volume of earthworks permitted within the outstanding landscape and other areas. District plan controls to actually control buildings within a significant amenity landscape, recognition of Waitahu, Waitonga, and there's one other one, obviously, restriction of the subdivisional potential in that area. Thank you. Now, I'd like to welcome Rebecca Ryder, who's going to talk a little bit about a matter that's been raised a couple of times now, is the original 1996 landscape study done by Ethmus Group, and then the transition through into, thanks, Christine, the 2013 Boffamiskal report. And that Boffamiskal report really was the kind of nemesis or the start of the information which flowed into the district plan review. So we'll move on to the next one, and I'll hand over to Rebecca Ryder, and we'll also just hand out her couple of page brief and also email that to all the Zoom parties. So welcome, Rebecca.
Kia ora tātou. Yes, thanks for having me. I'm here really just to sort of outline and answer some of the questions that were raised at the last workshop, which I wasn't at, just to give some understanding of the work that we were engaged to do in terms of identification of the outstanding landscape and outstanding natural feature that was undertaken in 2012, 2013 with the completion of the report that the page was just presented before. So you have, and this is a common sort of process of through district plan reviews, a re-looking at landscape studies in line with the current best practice, in line with case law, And I'm talking over top of the matters, broadly the matters that I've raised in the memorandum that I've sent through to John as of yesterday, that in that ultimately the 1996 study undertaken by ISMIS identified the eastern and western scarp of Te Mata as two separate areas, and also identified the eastern scarp or eastern area, as shown on the page, right down to the river itself, so including the river body and the river plains and river terraces. In our review, we looked at the case law that in the 17 years between our review and the earlier study, looked at the case law that had developed over that period of time, looked at the national policy documents, and also looked at the regional and statutory and non-statutory documents that have been pulled together. So the report that we prepared in 2013 sort of clearly outlines where things had moved, including assessment criteria and approaches to identification of ONFLs. There's a plethora of cases that have talked to what does outstanding mean, what does the interpretation of outstanding natural landscapes mean, and as a result we became more refined in the mapping and looked to the geomorphological indicators within the landscape that were reflecting the feature itself or the landscape of Te Mata. And as you've seen in the earlier slide that John put forward, was the identification of an outstanding feature, which is known as in a geomorphological term, from the Geopreservation Society's information, a hogsback ridge. It's a unique geological feature, and so that has been identified separately within the overall outstanding natural landscape that's been identified. So hopefully that in the memo answers some questions around the differentiation and how we moved from what the 1996 study had identified and what the 2013 report had identified. The other consideration, feedback, sorry. The other consideration was where the significant amenity landscape sat around the ONFL, and that also considered the extent to which it related to the ONFL, or to an ONFL is a short term for outstanding natural feature or landscape, and that was in relation to the foothills and the plains and the river terrace areas. We wanted to keep it relative to the qualities that existed for the in relation to the ONFL, and also took into account the reasonable amount of modification to the river terrace that had occurred with the Craggy Range and adjacent developments. So in the 1996 study, as I identified before, the ONFL extended down into the river. In the 2013 study, on the back of updated criteria, case law, and the context and the operating environment but the existing landscape context that we were assessing within with the modifications, we brought that significant amenity landscape back to the road corridor and then wrapping around the rolling foothills of Te Mata. So hopefully that answers a few questions that were raised at the last workshop.
Pass that over
back to you, John.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rebecca.
Yeah, so Christine, if you could just go back a couple of slides to those that diagram with the number of boxes there. Just one back, another couple, I think. Thank you. There, thank you. So what happened in timing-wise, obviously there's the 1996 study, then we moved to the 2013 Boffin-Miskell work, and then the district plan was notified in September 2015, and then around about March 2020, the only outstanding appeal was the MTT appeal on those provisions up on Mangatunga to Ridgeline. So that's finally being resolved between Mr. Raikes and those parties. And so really all those other outstanding landscapes and areas have all been incorporated in the plan. So when you're using e-plan or online, you can see all of those, and also all of those outstanding landscapes and significant areas have been brought into plan. So that's the progression from 1996 to the 2013 study and then the implementation. So that's occurred over a significant amount of time.
We have a question, Tanya. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Rebecca. I haven't seen the memo, but just in relation to that, I just wanted to ask you around those ONFLs, and if you probably, in hindsight, when I'm thinking about it, just moving forward, the Randerson report around the RMA cultural landscapes and that, was any consideration, even prior to the Randerson report, taken into consideration around the collection of sites under the RMA 6E and 7J, including protection and restoration of cultural sites in relation to tikanga and traditions. And the reason I ask this is because I asked this last time in relation to the report that Māori did for this area, and what consideration has been taken into play post this, but I'm not quite sure if you've been involved in it, so my question may be a moot point. Kia ora.
Oh. Kia ora, Tanya. The work we did undertake, that there was a separate package of work that was undertaken by the chair of this meeting, Baden Barber. He undertook a cultural, looking at the cultural landscapes, and Baden can perhaps speak to that. That was taken into consideration and brought to the table for the identification of the ONFLs in that study. In terms of the Randerson report, obviously that's come many years later, and cultural landscapes have yet to obviously work their way through into how they'll be identified in district plans and landscapes, but absolutely. And also within our practice as landscape architects, we have a new, more recently only adopted late last year, a new guidance document for landscape assessment, which looks at a bicultural approach to that. So that's also in response to where our practice as professionals are moving in this field. But in terms of this study, yes, we did look at that, and I'll probably just leave it at that at this point. Yeah.
Kia ora, Tanya. Kei te tika, Rebecca. I did a bit of work for the council back in 2013 or something, to look at our significant landscapes to Māori across the Rohe, actually. I think right across the Hastings district. So there was a number of them. And identified why they were significant to our people, in terms of the pūrākau and the history that related to each of those landscapes. And Te Mata certainly was one of the top two that we had there on that list. So I think there was about maybe 12 or something from memory. But yes, and really just to portray to the council the significance of those areas to our people, mai rāna.
Through you.
And can I just respond? Sorry, and the reason I'm also asking that is, I did some work 2 years ago over here in Te Whanganui Aotearoa with the council, and I worked closely with Gavin from IFMIS. And we actually put in place what we thought was an outstanding natural feature, and that's why I'm looking at this to see, what work was done in relation to that significant amenity landscape. And then there's that outstanding natural landscape line, so I'm just trying to understand, because we actually, our tangata whenua, mana whenua over here, we had influence on actually, putting in place these lines that are going to obviously go into the district plan, etc. So, I mean, I'm just trying to understand if we still have that influence or we just have to go with what's there.
Perhaps I'll respond, but I think in terms of process, there was that collaborative process at the beginning of that review work, and with Baden's work inputting into that. In terms of where that sits around influencing the extent of the ONFL, that's been adopted through the past council, through the district plan review, and I would imagine that's a matter for the next sort of planning process and planning round to re-look at that if that's the will. And I think that's fair points around that collaborative process and from a cultural landscape perspective as well. So I think this is where we landed in relation to that. In the terms of significant amenity landscape, it still looks at that landscape as a whole, but looks at that transition of value across all of the attributes that we have to consider.
I've got Robin, and then Henare.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair.
Rob, your mic's muffled. Can you
okay.
He's eating.
Sharpen it up?
No, it was the hill lines I could see out my window over here that all been approved by Napier City Council and no build, but they all got houses on. Look, this was a question to John, and it was really around the MTT appeal and the question as to whether or not that's a guide of caution to us in the sense that it, as I understood it, they introduced a whole lot of Wahiwa significant landscapes, etc. And is that therefore what's the word, tempering the council's ability to put those caveats over private land?
Yes, that's quite a good point. I guess what came out of that decision was a decision from the Environment Court about the balance between the right to farm and the balance between how many rights could be taken away in terms of looking at cultural significance. And where the judge came down, there were some requirements that weren't carried through, and the judge said, look, a fair balance is this balance, and that's that decision. And that has been used in crafting the various plan provisions that we've used or proposing to use in these provisions. But I think also the context was slightly different. Obviously, one of the big issues up on the range there was obviously the wind farm. And as you know, that had been gone for a resource consent. So there is that balance that's been determined, and it's been through a fairly extensive appeal process. It's been to the High Court, it's come back, it's been referred back to those parties. And I think the last part of the appeal process has been around the issue of one of the appellants, Mr. Rakes, who owns property or farm up that area. He has been trying to negotiate with MTT, about the finalisation of location and scale of different sites. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's similar lines on those areas, aren't there?
Yes.
So when you're saying is in the blue line or the green line that we were talking about, is there are negotiating points in those areas? Is that
yes?
What's being added? Yeah, sorry.
You'll see there in terms of it's gone back up on the shared screen. You'll see they are similar types of issues in terms of the outstanding landscape areas and also the significant areas. So there are quite a few negotiation points still to be worked through, but they are similar concepts, and they've applied across the 8 or 10. I think that there was 8 outstanding natural features that have transferred into the plan, and I think another 10 or 12 amenity landscapes which came through in these documents.
Thank you for that clarity.
You done there, Robin? Good boy. Okay.
just for my sake, we'll learn what we know. Oh, sorry. For my sake, can we desist from using abbreviations? I mean, it's another language all of its own, and to be quite honest, I'm like, what the heck's that? So can we use the full language that God gave us rather than this?
Yep,
If you wouldn't mind, for my sake.
Yeah, Hanari, I get confused too. There's too many shortening ones.
Yeah, good point, good point, good point. ONFL, what does ONFL mean?
Outstanding
natural
Outstanding
landscape.
natural features.
Yeah.
Any other ones that?
Yes, AL.
Oh, sorry.
Manga haruru tangitu trust. Yeah, manga haruru.
Elwyn, SAL. Yes. Significant amenity landscape.
Significant amenity landscape.
What, any other kupu kari te mōhio? Elwyn?
Thank you, Chair. Question for Rebecca. I understand there was another report done by Boffin-Miskell in 2018, and I'm just wondering how that relates to the 2013 report you're talking about, and how different it was to the 2013 report.
So, good question. The 2018 report was one that was in response to the Craigie Range track, and it was going back to looking at it on a more refined level with a series of different experts feeding into that, including Mare and others. We had recreation consultants, we had pedologists from a soils perspective, looking at all of this really intricate detail and understanding of the eastern scarp and the eastern face of Te Mata. So it wasn't the scope of that report to re-look at the extent of the outstanding natural feature, but to actually understand the variance of sensitivities of that landscape, the variance of sensitivities from a cultural perspective, and I'm sure that Mare can speak to his component of work within that. But that report was produced as a collaborative multi-consultant and multi-engage. I think there's multiple engagement that Mare undertook to understand those values as well.
So is that the report we should be referring to rather than the 2013 report in this discussion?
In terms of the identification of the outstanding natural feature and landscape, no. The extent of that was the 2013 report. The understanding the more subtleties of the sensitivities of the landscape, yes, the 2018 report gives you more clarity. Most landscape studies, just by way of information or helpfulness, landscape studies wouldn't get to the level of detail that the 2018 report did. It was in that we were responding to a matter, an issue that had occurred on the Eastern Scarp, and understanding how does the community value that, how do mana whenua and value that landscape, and then also looking at what condition that landscape is in, and how could that be improved, or what are the options for improvement to that landscape were.
Right, Your Worship.
Kia ora, thank you through you, Chair. Can I just have some clarification on recommendation C about Wahitonga sites identified in a cultural assessment report should be part of the plan change, or whether they should form a wider Wahitonga review? Can I just have some explanation around what that would mean?
Yeah, so in terms of the recommendation, what we're seeking guidance from this group, and obviously the District Plan Committee is that there is the document that was prepared, the cultural assessment that was done by Mare and Dr. Coles and a number of parties, and we've got all that information documented, and really what's being suggested there by Ryan is the possibility that we actually include that in the plan change, so that it gets notified with the various view shafts, the prohibition lines, and it adds that an extra mention of protection for those Waitangu, Waitapu, and Waiata.
Yeah. All right, we'll just move on to the next slide, eh?
Thanks, Christine. This is where I'd like to introduce, if we carry on to the, yep, keep going, that's great. You're getting them flicking over quite nicely. And we'll just stop at this one. I'd like to introduce Boyden Evans here. And this was a question that got raised at previous hui, and particularly where does the actual view shaft area affected, where's the extent of the view shafts as they go up at the cliff? And so I'd like to hand over to Boyden just to talk about this concept of view shafts and how they'll operate. Welcome, Boyden.
Kia ora tātou. If you recall, in the last two workshops, we ran through the drive-by videos to illustrate the view as one moves along Waimarama Road, moving north-south and south to north. And on this image here, you'll see the turquoise, the blue colour is the extent of the proposed view shaft. The yellow line is the proposed prohibition line. And what we've added, based on the question that was raised at the last workshop, is the extent of the green lines. And that shows the extent of the view shaft over that whole face. And also what has been added are the red dotted lines to show the three different ownership parcels: the Drabbles, the Huttons and the Smalls. So the view shaft, if you recall, we drove along that to illustrate what one would view in terms of the eastern escarpment as you moved along that area, and we had defined the proposed prohibition line with the yellow line on those images. Now this is just standing back, giving you the sort of the big picture, the overall, and we've added the green parameters, if you like, to the north and the south to show the extent of the proposed view shaft. And the provisions that Rowan tabled last time and spoke to, and the assessment criteria, would apply to this area in green from Waimarama Road. I think that sort of summarizes what this is actually showing, and it's really a sort of a slight refinement or development from what was covered in the past two view shafts, across two workshops, sorry.
Thanks, Boyden. And I think the thing I'd just like to clarify is you can see the red dotted lines. When you look straight on to the left, you'll see a little pin, and that's the house belonging to the Smalls. Then you'll see the pin, thanks, Christine. Then the middle pin is the Wellwood Farm block, which is owned by the Huttons. And then the very last pin is Mr. Drabbles' block. So that red dotted line is the boundary between Drabbles and Wellwood block.
Right. Mike, you have a question, comment?
Kia ora, Baden. Look, just get Boyden, I'm just trying to get a bit of clarity, because you did say that the conversations moved on a little bit from where we've left off over the last two hui. So did I hear you correctly? In regards to the yellow line, everything above the yellow lines is I think, prohibited buildings. Is that correct? Or is that still part of the view shaft?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, that's correct. That yellow line hasn't changed from that very first workshop. That's a prohibited line, and that applies to those provisions that Rowan had outlined in the draft provisions, including building and some other activities in terms of woodlots, forestry and earthworks as well.
So if I've heard you correctly there, so there's the possibility above the yellow line for buildings to take
No, not above the line.
Not above the yellow line, no, just below the yellow line. Thank you. Correct, so that yes. Brings it down by the pulls it down to the wool shed, the stockyards.
Yes, about there in the middle of the Wellwood block. Yes, that's correct. If you recall earlier, and John covered it in his opening slides, there was a no building line originally at 240. Yep. 240 metre contour, which is of course much higher up the escarpment.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Baden.
Ka wai, Mike, and we will come to some of the proposed developments on that block So,
Just the next slide.
next slide, yep.
Baden, can I have a question on
sorry.
that one, Baden?
Yep.
If we go back.
Oh, sorry, Anne, didn't see you there.
That's okay, thank you. And thank you for that map because it clearly outlines where the property boundaries are, which is interesting to me. So what I'd like to know is below the yellow line on the Smalls property, what can be built there under that if those lines are put into place as they are? What can be built on the Smalls property, which takes up roughly half of that view shaft?
Yeah, so if people are comfortable, I could go on to the options and that may be able to help you. Is that all right? I've got a set of, in the report, if we turn to page, I think, yeah, they start, option 1, 2 and 3 start on page 14 of the agenda.
Yeah.
Yep. So could we just, is that okay, Christine, please, to move through to them?
You okay with that, Anne?
Yeah, sort of. I've read the recommendations.
Oh, sorry.
It's not that I'm just asking, on that significant amenity landscape, what can be built under those conditions if the prohibition line goes there?
Yep, so I think this one's actually quite a good one.
It is a good one.
So in terms of the Smalls area, under the present plan provisions or under options 2 or 3, which one are you talking about? The present provision?
2 or 3.
Oh, 2 or 3, okay. So we'll concentrate on those. In 2, you imagine that there's a prohibition line that's come from the yellow right down to the blue.
Yeah.
And then in terms, that prohibition, I imagine would be a building prohibition, so you couldn't build any buildings at all. And you may consider prohibition of, you probably, it's up to council, but there's the possibility of prohibition of possibly buildings and shelter belts, but you may want to deal with those in a different way. Then you come down to option 3, which restricts the building or positioning of buildings at 200 metres back from the boundary. And it also goes through a set of assessment criteria about location, visibility, colours, all of those things in terms of what you can and can't do. And I guess one of the indications that Rowan has hinted at is, would you want to set a maximum building amount? So say as an example, you wanted to say, right, there'll be farm buildings, but there'll only be a maximum of X amount. You may want to do that. And I think the other thing that you'd probably consider is the positioning of shelter belts, fencing, network utility operators, all of those things. So, and the last point I think that Rowan had, and I'll just flick over this, was that he had recommended earthworks be limited to, I think it was 500, 200, sorry, or 50, is it? 50, sorry, 50 for maintenance work in terms of tracks. And also, he also looked at earthworks within, earthwork bunds within the SAL shafts, identified in the planning maps, which is this view shaft area, restricted discretionary, so that's a type of resource consent. And then lastly, he talked about the fences, but also that subdivision of lifestyle box within the SLA 6 would be a prohibited activity. So you couldn't keep cutting off those little ones every 3 years.
Thanks, John. So just to clarify, the only way to actually stop any activity is for the prohibition line to go to the road?
Say that again?
The only way to stop any activity is for the prohibition line to go to the road, otherwise it would be restricted discretionary.
No, there are some activities that would be prohibited, like the subdivisional, and then the council would have to work through the options of, do you want it to be discretionary, restricted discretionary, whatever the categories are.
Right.
But if you had prohibited, prohibition line came down to Waimama Road, then you couldn't build any buildings.
That's correct, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Right, no one on the Zoom there? No. Okay.
Thank you.
Right, carry on.
Mate,
kia ora.
Maybe go back to that previous slide.
Thank you for that, and that outline too as well would have been useful. Maybe it's coming up a little later in the presentation, but would have been really good to identify those arc sites in here too as well. Given that I know when just looking at particularly the Hutton and where the Craggy Track kind of meandered its way virtually kind of on the inside of that red perforated line, not too far up from the yellow line that's indicated, and using, I guess, the approach that Heritage Pohetanga Trust have in terms of a registered archaeological site, that it also has to take into account a certain parameter of up to 600 metres. So just curious to see where those things could have been plotted in here to ensure that that yellow line is accommodating the extent of that reach or influence area. Is that still coming
Yes.
in terms of the archaeological?
Yep, so through you, Mr. Chair, what we're doing is, as you know, Galen Carter's been doing the block of the Drabbles, and then her next priority, Rowan, has envisaged that she'll do the work in and around those sites where the COCs sit, the Hutton COCs, and with this proposed, one of the options and proposed is to bring forward the Wahiwa Waitapu provisions as a plan change as well. So the archaeological sites, a lot of them have been identified, but I think that Galen's work will probably identify additional ones that are probably not necessarily in the archaeological register.
What's COC again?
Sorry, I'm guilty as sin. Certificate of Compliance.
Right. Cool.
Sorry, my apologies. Give us a clip each time I do it, please.
But good point that you raise, Māori. We'd like to know where all the wahi tapu are and whether they're below that yellow line. There probably are some down there. So
the work that Murray has done is identified the significant parts, but there's some more detailed work to do.
Right. Go by.
Mr. Chair, through you, if I could just add a comment.
Yes.
The work that Māori, the work that Māori had done, that certainly influenced the yellow line. There was an earlier report that I prepared for the council that used the work that had been completed previously that Rebecca spoke about earlier, and also Marai's work that he had done on the cultural assessment was taken into account in drafting that yellow line. But as John mentioned, there's some additional, more detailed work being done currently, which may reveal some additional features in terms of archaeological sites.
Good boy.
Thank you.
What I might do is, has everyone got the agenda paper? And this map is actually very good because we can talk to the various options, and I'll get Christine to identify exactly where we're talking about so that you've got the visual option in front of you, and then we'll just talk through the three options. So I guess the purpose of this report was to get a guidance from councillors and obviously the Maori Standing Committee about which direction we head out of these three options, and there may be other directions that come out of the discussion. So what I'd like to do is I'll start off with option 1, and that appears on page I think it's 14 of your agenda. So if you turn to that, and then we can look at the diagram which has been shared with everyone and talk our way through it. Okay, so this one you can see fairly clearly retain prohibition line as proposed by the landscape architects from Boffa-Miskell, and that's that yellow line. So you see it tracking along. It's thanks, Christine, that's great. You can just go along there. Okay, and then Boyden's identified for us the view shaft area, which again, Christine, if you just track along the blue Waimarama Road, and it goes along Waimarama Road. Thanks, great. And then it tracks back up the green line, starting to head round to the back, or round to the side of Timata, and then it starts to, this is all on the small property, and then it crosses the boundary of the small property, goes into Wellwood Farm, then it takes its way up to the Hog Ridge again, Hogback Ridge. So if you go right up to the top, then come down the ridge. Thank you. And then come right the way along. Yeah, and this is all the area protected by the view shaft, and then we're coming down again to where we started. Okay, and what would happen in terms of, effectively what that does is above the yellow line, you're effectively saying the prohibition on buildings. Then below that, in the view shaft area, you would be having consent requirements, which would have a number of criteria, which will control buildings, plantations, earthworks, subdivisions, and there'll be a set of resource consent and performance standards. So in terms of the advantages and disadvantages, they're set out for that option. Now I'd like to move down to option 2. This one here is probably a more clear option in terms of the diagram. So what would essentially happen is, Christine again, if we just track around the outside. So you imagine that yellow line no longer sits in that position, but it follows, it goes along the blue here, right along Waimarama Road. Two. This is the prohibition one. So this is bringing, I'll just stop there. So you imagine, Elwyn, that the yellow prohibition, oh, you do? Oh, that's all right. We'll go back to the diagram. My apologies. So continue just tracking around those lines, please. Oh, did a runner on you, did it? Yeah, thanks. And so it'll go up, that same line we talked about before. So that prohibition on buildings would be all of that area encased where Christine is going around. So continue up to the ridge line, go down the ridge line, and then come back down the green, yep, continue right down. So that whole envelope would be an area where building is prohibited. Okay, so just to be clear about that, that's that option.
Can I just clarify something, Chair?
Yep.
So that's other than the certificate of compliance, 3 houses that are
yes,
already
those
allowed.
ones that have already got the certificate of compliance, lucky there, they've got that right to implement those.
So
okay?
it's 2 houses and a supplementary
3
dwelling.
in total,
3.
so 2 houses and a supplementary.
Thank you.
Yep.
So just everyone clear about that option? The yellow line comes down to the blue line, basically, and prohibited building, prohibited from that road right up to the top, except for the 3 dwellings that have certificate of compliance already. Okay, Tapai? Okay, yep.
Thank you. Then lastly, option 3. So this one here, again, Christine, if we start on the yellow line and just track around the prohibition line, so starting at the green boundary there, again, the prohibition line is where it's recommended by the landscape architects. So everything above that line, right up to the ridge of the cliffs, all buildings are prohibited. All buildings would be prohibited, so not allowed, an area from the yellow line right up to the green top line. Okay. Yes, Mr. Hutton's always complaining about fridges, cars, wheels and tyres being chucked off the top. He has to kind of tidy them up. Okay, and then below that yellow line, between the yellow line and down to the blue line, you see that where I'm tracking now, that's where you would bring in the view shafts, and the view shafts also run right up. So the view shaft area runs right up to the very, very top. So effectively though, you cannot, with the prohibited line, you couldn't build above it, but below it, it kicks you into, again, a resource consent, and you would have to go through a resource consent assessment criteria, which look at all those aspects of colour, location, and that's where we were talking before about the limits in total building, the limits on setbacks, and you can go into whatever detail or how be as restrictive as you want there. And then also we're to be introducing the Waitapu, Wahitonga and Waiatua provisions in terms of identifying that any of those sites in that area will be, again, working through a resource consent process. Okay. So just open to any questions if people wish.
Alrighty, so we have, we've got Tanya, okay, we'll go to Zoom and then we'll come back to the room. So Tanya, kia ora. Tanya, do you have a question, comment? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. Kia ora, John. Thank you for that. I know I keep talking about this, but my interest is in relation to the cultural significance of this whole area and going off Made's report, etc. I just wanted to ask the question, do you have a map that overlays all the ARC sites and where everything is?
Probably the best one is, yeah, I think if we continue on, down, I've put that report or that plan, you just go right down to the very end. I'm picking at the end of the slides, or have the slide that you're after. Oh, there it is. I'll go one back, please. So Tanya, that's the report. Yep. I think you're referring to, and that's the map out of the report. And just for clarity, you can see, and I might just show Christine where Waimara Road runs.
Yeah, because it looks, I mean, I can't interpret it.
So it's just the scale, but effectively you've got Waimara Road. So you just watch.
Can't hear you, John.
Just watch that cursor, people, and we're going to identify where Waimara Road is on this map.
Thank you. So what we'll do now is if you watch the cursor, this is Waimara Road coming where it crosses. No, you're going the wrong way. That's it. Head this way. Right, so you imagine you're driving along that road, that's coming round to the bend, and you're starting to come up to the Smalls property. And as we go along, we're also looking at, right, I'll stop just there, a little bit back. That'll be roughly where Craggy Range is. Then you continue on up, and thanks, Christine, and you'll start to climb up the hill and continue up over the hill, and then coming down back to, I think it's obviously Tomato Road or Munga Territory intersection just there. So we'll just go over it again quite slowly so you can see we're starting out by the bridge and then we're coming up over the rise and then going to that flat straight, you know, where there's a number of trees that have been planted. Yep, imagine that. And then we're coming along past Craggy Range, down past there, coming down to, yep, and then raising up over the hill and then going down to the Munga Territory, Tomato Road intersection. So that's roughly where it sits. Thank you.
Mike, are you up? You got a question?
Kia
ora.
Yeah, yeah, not so much a question, but more getting down to the knuckle of the discussions. So in regards to the archaeological and the waihi tapu, regardless of which option we go to, those sites still need to be registered, regardless.
Yes, that's 100% correct. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. The only thing I would say in regards to the waihi tapu is that I understand that the waihi tapu, a lot of those waihi tapu were identified in the cultural impact report that Mare done. But people made that known specifically for that study. They didn't necessarily, if you like, give permission or sign off to take it to this step. So I would say we need to actually go back and re-engage with those people, with those particular partners, to make sure that they understand that this will go to a different level and it actually becomes public, just in regards to that space.
Yeah.
In my own personal views around option 3 2 and 3. I started the morning off basically at option 2, just bringing the prohibition site down to the yellow line. But as the morning and discussions have gone on, or sorry, the afternoon and discussions have gone on, I've actually gone to option 3, and that's taking the prohibition line right through to the Waimarama Road, solely for the purpose and understanding that I understand that there's still there'll be a lot of water that will still have to go underneath that bridge in order to make that happen. And if you like, it may get wound back at the end of the day. But for me, I would rather have that as our starting point, that we offer the most protection we can for the I think Tamata landscape and you know, for the cultural impact of it and so forth, rather than start at a compromised position of where the yellow line is. So for me, I understand that those that already have a resource consent, those consents remain viable, and I have no problem with that. It does allow, if you like, the ability to bargain, negotiate, compromise with those landowners to get them on board. As I said, I started the day off at option 2, and that was about protecting people's rights. So I understand when you take away someone else's right, by default, you're taking away your own rights as well. So when we take away their right to use their land and say to them, you know, that we're going to put a prohibition line right up to Waimarama Road, we take away some of their rights, and by default, we take away our own rights. But
Mike, I think
as this conversation has progressed, my gut tells me go to option 3, start at offer the
I
best
think you've got the
protection that we
options
can.
wrong.
Yeah, option 2.
Yeah, no, keep talking though, Mike. We're following you. We're following you. Kapai.
Yeah, start at the best, you know, get the best protection that we can, because you can always take a step back rather than start at the minimum, because you can't go forward, if that makes sense.
To you, Mr. Chair, I think, Mike, you're referring to option 2, and you're saying bring the prohibition line right down to Waimarama Road, aren't you?
Oh, sorry, yes, I might have them right around the wrong way, John, but I think you get the gist.
Kia ora, Mike.
Thank you.
Yep. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So, we'll go to the room, Anne, and then
One more.
we'll go Anne, Your Worship, and then we'll come back to you, Mare.
Thank you, Baden. So just clarification, if we, for instance, we decided on option 3 rather than 2, if any Wahitonga or Wahitapu sites were found, would that mean another change to the district plan?
No, that would be included. So the council's got the decision-making power to say to the staff, we want these Waitapu, Waitonga, Waiatua included in any of the changes. And that's the obvious thing to do, because the information exists. And probably the best local example was, you know, the ponds situation down at Craggy Range. We wanted to build the ponds, and because we were aware of, from the report of that situation, the staff just kept asking for, where's your information about this issue? And eventually the consent hasn't gone any further. Yeah,
oh,
so
they've got a brand new great big pond in there.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And my other question, and it's just one probably for more for people that are on live streaming, with any decision we make, will it go to public notification in the end?
Yes.
Full public notification?
Yes, it does. So the plan change process is fully notified. All district plan changes are.
Thank you. Cool.
Kapai, Your Worship.
Kia ora. Just wanting to follow up on what Robin highlighted earlier around the existing landowners' rights, and has conversation been had with those 3 landowners that you and socialised both the prohibition line and the controls?
Yes, so in terms of the prohibition line has been socialised, the yellow one there in the screen has been socialised with only the Huttons. In terms of the plan provisions, Rowan had initial talk with the Smalls, but it was a very general talk. And then Mr. Drabble, he's aware of the prohibition line, but he's not directly impacted because it's probably not going to impact him. But we haven't had a proper sit down with him and talk about the implications with him either. Okay.
Kia ora. Mare, kei a koe.
Look, firstly, I misplaced my minutes and recordings for the record, so you're just making sure that we hit on the right option on this. Pretty much the tautoko where Mike has basically landed, and where that cursor is right now, I guess on the Drabble property, in a previous mapping, it did show up an area of concern in relation to the work we undertook to identify in that kind of cluster of eucalyptus trees right down on the corner here above those words. And you can see how that sits outside the line. And of course the Urunanga as this went through the discussion to look at where that potentially line needed to now go. Everyone wanted it to go right down to the Waimarama Road. So I guess the key aspect here is that one, we know that the certificate of compliance that's currently in there will go through some other measures, tests and assessments. The full revelation and account of the archaeological sites will potentially add sites, I take it, and that'll inform us particularly around the assessment, measurement and location of those. I think that its whole contrast and due respect private owner rights in terms of the whole discussion. The report and the work that we had undertaken clearly is out on the public domain, just to outline on that previous map that we produced to full extent, and just for me to describe that the Wahiatua aspect was taken from some generated from older records to show that once upon a time a wetland based on some contours potentially had gone into this particular space. That wahi tapu that I give reference to came as a contribution of the whānau from Waimarama in terms of their knowing of when at times the movement between Heretaunga and Waimarama, certain springs in that location, and also you'll see we're coming back down into the right-hand column, almost where those words Waimarama Road, and you see the outline of that particular water source in there. So in between those trees and that water source was an area of significant concern in terms of the knowing coming from a cultural memory of those whānaus that said, look, tūpāpaku were bathed and washed, and so it signifies the importance of that being wahi tapu. So that can come as a consequence of the site being registered when that time was right. Now that we've cleared the hurdles, I guess, in terms of the MTT thing to progress that review on wahi tapu and seeking new registrations. So just to summarise, wherever that option is, the people, their desire, their momoia is to bring it right down to that blue line of Waimarama Road. Thank you.
Kia ora, Mare. So that's option 2. Mike and Mare, do we have anyone with an alternate view? Your Worship.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Look, this is really, really important to our council, and, you know, we addressed the Western Escarpment about 20 years ago, and for us to get the Eastern Escarpment into a plan change position where we can implement a plan change without appeal process and environmental court, I think it's really, really important that while we have a direction of options and you know, we look after C and A, but I would like to propose that that we need to take, this is a significant cultural and outstanding natural landscape for mana whenua. The landowners recognise the importance of their land, and I think it's really important that we bring the people together on board first before we send a direction of options, and so then we can navigate through a process that gets everybody on the page, rather than sending out now a recommendation of option 2 or 3. I would like to think that we, just because of the Mangaraharuru Tangatu appeals that we had and how long that process took for everyone involved and how difficult that process was. And so for us to be able to line up everybody together, our mana whenua, our landowners, our wider community, and to be able to have a process that is going to be successful. I just think that while we all want the highest level of protection for this maunga, it is culturally unique and absolutely beautiful landscape that everybody enjoys. But you know, we know that the landowners have property rights and that the court will take into effect those property rights. And so we need to give some consideration to those rights. And so I just think that I would like to propose a recommendation that Council engage with the affected landowners and outline to them the direction of the 2 options to be considered, both option 2 and 3, or an alternative option to meet the aspirations of mana whenua and the landowners and report back to a future either Heretaunga Takoto Noa or district plan meeting after having those ideas socialised with those landowners.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can't see anyone on the screen. Is anyone? Yeah, put the screen up now. We can. We've kind of got the gist. We understand that layout there. Okay, so so there was Your Worship's put forward an alternate option. Any discussion on that? Mike, kia ora.
Kia ora, Bailiff. And thank you very much for that, Your Mayor. I can support where you're going with this, rather than actually just come straight out with a recommendation. So I took the view that there's going to be quite a bit of conversation that needs to take place with the landowners if we're going to avoid heading into court. So for me, by taking the option of 2, of going straight to the road, and actually that becomes a starting point from our perspective in regards to those conversations. Where they end up, I think, is really where the skill of yourself and those within council and within mana whenua and expressing the views. What is the happy space, not only for mana whenua, but for actually the landowners, recognising that they do have rights, but making sure that, if you like, it doesn't become a mad scramble at the end of it, that people are actually trying to extract as much rights as possible out of this process. I'm conscious of the in option 3 was to go back 200 meters. What size building? Is there a double story? All of those type of conversations, and that can get quite messy. If we're able to, get it close as we can to the road with minimal development, other than those that already have a consent, and we can actually agree on that with the landowners, then that's a great outcome for everybody. So for me, that's why I took the view that as mana whenua, seek as much protection as our starting point, and that gives us the ability to have a genuine discussion with the landowners. So yes, I'm supportive of you, Sandra. Kia ora.
Ka wai. So what I'm hearing is that, that the general feel is around an option 2, and then that would be taken to the landowners for a discussion. At least they would know where mana whenua council feeling is, so that you're starting off from a start point, I guess. Yeah. Ka wai. Okay, Councillor Travers.
Yes, I'm agreeing with Mayor Sandra and with Mike. I kind of feel, I mean, I would like to see the line at the road, but I think just boldly going in there and nailing our colours to the mast kind of sets up a controversial, confrontational kind of head-to-head thing. And I still believe with goodwill and with education and understanding that the landowners could be encouraged to soften their stance towards the cultural things, because once it's gone, it's gone. You know, we're not just talking about the good of the next 10 years or the good of the next 20 years. And where these landowners are concerned, we're not talking about their lifetime. We're actually talking about their family reputation and perpetuity. We're talking about generations to come. So for me, you know, I don't own great shafts of land like that, but if I did, I would want to have a reputation for doing the right thing, for perpetuity and for the people of this district. So yeah, I'm relying upon negotiators to be able to work their way through this, to try and get as much of that protected as we possibly can.
Kia ora, Councillor. And I think we're getting general agreement around that approach. Nigel's got some kupu that we'll put before the committee, that hopefully captures all of that kōrero. But I think generally we all agree. Councillor O'Keefe.
You know, I'm quite happy with that approach, but I have to say on a personal note, I wouldn't want to live there. There's no sun. No sun, you'd be living in the shade.
I think they get the morning sun, but then it drops over the back in the afternoon, eh? Yeah. Okay, here we
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think Nigel's just going to get that alternative recommendation typed up and put on the screen.
Two-minute recess, people.
And Mr. Chair, I think C needs to stand and A needs to stand, and the recommendations on page 14, so that the Wahitonga sites need to be identified and included in the plan change. Yeah, and A, which is receiving the report.
Just further to that, Baden, I talked about earlier about in regards to those that had identified Wahitapu sites, that we actually go back and make sure that they understand what this actually means, that they become public.
Yep.
I know that some of our whānau struggle with that.
So we need to make sure that the Wahitapu sites that have been identified by hapu, that the hapu know that if, they take it through a plan change, that they will become public information.
Yeah, yeah. That report is public.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, the report is public at the moment, but it's just that courtesy of letting our whānau know that these Wahitapu will be made public and discussed. Yep.
The purpose is that the information what's given for will actually change, and it's just notifying them of that. It's that courtesy.
Ka pai.
We know what your whānau's like, Baden.
How's everything in Hitereiria, Mike? You're on mute, I can't kari te rongo.
Sorry, I feel as though I've escaped Aotearoa to get away from the heat and come over here to the rain.
Yeah, you fellas
Very
got the
wet
heat,
over
we
here.
got the makariri here. Yeah, we haven't had a hot day for a while.
Oh, it's just been pretty much constantly wet over here. And of course, now your Omicron COVID infection rates higher than New South Wales. So it's
Yeah, it's going crazy over here. Anyone know what the figures were today?
22,000.
It must be 1,000 in Hawke's Bay because it was 860 yesterday. Yeah. Yeah.
1,000, probably 1,000 in Hawke's Bay.
Yeah.
Cases. Right, Kari.
700 Hawke's Bay. While we're waiting, mate, it's also been interesting to see the attitudes towards COVID so over here compared to home. I think they're far more used to it over here. So if I just get on with that approach over here.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right, Kapai. We have a recommendation to put before the committee. We'll put that up on the screen.
So through you, Chair, A and C are as they stand as the original recommendation. So if you just focus on recommendation B.
I'll maku e pānui, that council engage with the affected landowners and outline to them the direction of the option to be considered, being option 2 or an alternative solution, including option 3, to meet the aspirations of mana whenua landowners in the wider community, and report back to the Heretaunga Takoto Noa Māori Standing Committee and the District Planning and Bylaws Committee meetings.
And can you put the date in, Christine, please?
With the dates to be added.
23rd.
Go through both committees. All right. So 23rd of March. And a special meeting will be called for Heretaunga Takoto Noa.
Just if I could, through you, Mr. Chair, I think it needs to happen in that proper sequencing of Takoto Noa first and then district plan follow, because otherwise this input flows on.
Yep. Okay.
So we just have to watch those dates.
Yeah. Okay. We'll schedule a meeting for Heretaunga Takoto Noa before the 23rd of March. So people feeling okay with that option B as part of this recommendation? B is part of this recommendation?
I think we only got to watch that we can get a hold of all these parties and talk that through in time. So if not, then we're going to have to reschedule, because there's no point in rushing things on this. If we can get most of these issues sorted away, if it takes more time, then we will have to do that.
Mr. Chair, I think we take a date out and report back to the chairman of both committees.
At the earliest possible date.
All right. At the earliest possible date to undertake the consultation with the landowners. Niall, you got a part-time?
Yeah, just hours, right? Sorry, there's another Zoom going in my office, but just on option C, I agree with Mike's comments, the courtesy to notify.
Speak up, Ehoa.
I'm for the qualitative, which is...
Yeah, speak up into your mic.
Just on options. Just on option C.
Someone needs to mute.
C,
Someone needs to mute. Heretaunga.
Yep. Just on option C, I agree with Mike, the courtesy to notify, but also recognising that it's been a long time coming with all these assessments, cultural assessments, to get the recognition in the district plan. So it is an important opportunity, and if we can just express that, yeah, we really need to get further recognition in the district plan so we can avoid essentially what brought us here in the first place. Well, the track that should not be mentioned. That's all.
So
it's a direction to include. Is that what you're going?
Yeah.
Direction to include the inclusion of.
Nio, could you just speak a little bit clearer and just repeat the thing that you wanted included in C recommendation, please?
I think it's what Mike was saying about notification to our mana whenua hapu around their
yes,
their
yes, it was there.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that the hapu know that the Waitapu will be in the public arena. Is that
basically yes?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there was.
All right, Kapai, I think we'll grab that.
But it's important that they're involved in the district plan.
And involved in discipline. Yeah. Kapai. Any other hands up on the screen? No. So
sorry, can we get confirmation on that? What was that? We'll see. Is that exactly what it is there? Because it hasn't been changed.
That the committee provide guidance on whether Wahitonga sites identified in the cultural assessment report should be included as part of this plan change. Or whether they should form part of the wider Wahitonga review that is about to commence.
So that gets changed now. I think getting it clear, you're actually directing us to include them this time. And then secondly, that make sure hapu know that the Waitapu Wahitonga will be in the public arena. And that they will be involved in the future in the district plan. Is that correct?
We get that?
Is that correct, Niall? Yes, I think that was what Niall was saying.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're just going to chuck some words in there, and then we can move it. Another minute recess here, Homer. Should be.
Thank you, Baden, because I'm really supporting Niall on this. Because, like he said, we don't want to end up in the same place we have been in the past. So it's very important.
Goodbye. Yeah, no, we're getting some changes put in there. We'll put this up on the screen. I'll read it to make sure that people are happy with it. Niall, check it too. See that the committee direct that the Wahiwaanga sites identified in the cultural assessment report should be included as part of this plan change and ensure that hapu know the Wahiwaanga will be in the public arena and in the district plan. Hei te pai tēnā? Niall?
He's got his thumb up.
Kia ora.
Oh, I can't see him. Yeah, okay, ka pai. All right. So,
Mr. Chair, Mike might like to move the recommendations. And I'm happy
By Mike, you happy to remove it?
or,
Happy to move.
Pai, mā wai tautoko. Who wants the second? Yep, your worship will second it. All those in favour of the recommendations as outlined, keep my eye. Aye. Any against? Any against? Karakau. Motion carried. Ka pai, he Homa, thank you for getting to this point with this. So, yeah, discussions with landowners and then another meeting to be called. Ka pai, kia ora. Alrighty. We're just going to keep trucking through this. I don't think we have any breaks or anything, eh? Nah. Okay, we're on to item number 7. Tukuna to Te Raka ki a koe, Charles. Hara mai. This is Reserve Management Plan update for Havelock Hills, Frimley Park and Estelle Park. Yep, ka pai, Hen.
Kia ora, Chair. Are you happy for myself and Gordon to depart at this point? John, do you need us any further?
Oh, yeah, no. Thank you both for all your participation in our hui. Yeah, no, we don't, you don't need to be part of the rest of it. Thanks again.
Kia ora. Thanks.
Thank you, kia ora.
Ka kite, all right. Just going to move Charles into somewhere where his mic works.
Haere tonu, ko tēnā rā tātou. Okay, so tēnei he arotake e pāna ki ngā mahere whakahaere a rāhui o ngā māra, an update on the reserve management plans for Havelock Hills RMP, Estelle Park and Frimley Park. To provide you with some background on what has happened to date and how this has come about, if we could move slides, please, Christine. The Havelock North Hills Reserve Management Plan was adopted in 2015, which followed 2 community consultation sessions, 24 submissions to the draft RMP. The reserve management plan for Havelock recognised walking, running and dog walking, and identified a mountain bike trail through connected trails through the 4 reserves from Te Mata Park Trust. Following the adoption of the reserve management plan, there were complaints received regarding an increase in the use of mountain bikers, safety issues of bikers on walking-only tracks, and the completion of any further tracks was halted. In January of last year, the council resolved to review the Tainui Tanatoa and Hikanui reserve management plans with a focus on walking and mountain bike track networks, access and vehicle parking at Keith Sands Grove and Kairunga Road entrances, and to commission and find out more about the cultural landscape of Tainui Reserve and in particular Hikanui Pa. If we could move please, Christine. In March of 2021, the council notified the intention to review the Havelock North's reserve management plan and also to prepare Eskdale Park and Frimley Park. Over March through to August, really August, September, October, a bit of slippage there, there were specialist reports commissioned for the 6 reserves, inclusive of Mana Whenua Cultural Aspirations reports for Havelock North, archaeological assessments and arboricultural reports, and community consultation and data was gathered by Focal. If we could move on, please, Christine. The process that we're at the moment within the Reserves Act process is that we have conducted our community consultation with Mana Whenua for Havelock North, and we are now preparing a draft reserve management plan for further consultation with Mana Whenua and presentation to this committee. Moving on, please, we will. I'll give an overview of the Havelock North Hills Reserve Management Plan, and this view here you can see looking towards Te Mata. There are green spaces in Havelock North that comprise these 4 reserves. So moving on, please, Christine. Looking at these 4 reserves in Havelock North, they're held subject to the Reserves Act, and they're a mix of local purpose and recreation reserve. They form popular walking tracks and connectivity between Te Mata Park and all the way down to the village. There are reserves, all the reserves are off-lead dog exercise areas, and there are 2 registered archaeological areas which form the heart of the Hikanui Pa cultural landscape. The vegetation is predominantly pine, gum and macrocarpa, and the Mangaro stream runs through the reserve. Moving on, please, we'll focus on Tainui Reserve and Hikanui Pa. As a part of the Cultural Aspirations report that was commissioned by the team, if we can move on, please, one more. We've been working through a very different process with Manaaki Taiao, Te Tai Whenua, Heretaunga, and Uncle Mare can talk to this process. With the implementation of a Māori Genuine Progress Indicators program, the Manaaki Taiao are taking a very different approach to how they assess the cultural impact of a project. And rather than conducting cultural impact assessments, they are now writing cultural aspirations reports. This change and shift in the way of doing things is quite significant from where Tai Whenua have come from in the past. We now receive very clear guidance through cultural aspirations as to what Mana Whenua would like to see happen within these spaces. Here we have the key Mana Whenua aspirations that have come through from Manaaki Taiao, and that is to recognise Te Whānaua Heipora as Mana Whenua for the Karanema Reserve. What our staff have come to realise through this process is that there is an outstanding Treaty of Waitangi claim over the Karanema Reserve, which has been submitted by Te Whānaua Heipora, and therefore the Tai Whenua have asked us as council officers to recognise Te Whānau Heipora as mana whenua for the Karanema Reserve. The key cultural aspiration is to protect the cultural landscape and archaeology of Hikanui Pā. In the context of the previous report and the report to follow, the cultural landscape within Tainui Reserve is not registered or protected within our district plan. So it is a number one priority of our nannies and aunties and uncles and papas to see that this cultural landscape is protected. The work that has been conducted by Manaki Taiao through Dr. Anthony Cole has identified that these 4 reserves comprise a remnant forest, Ngāhere Urutapu, which was one of the last stands of forests in Heretaunga. And what Dr. Cole has identified is that remnant forest is actually a time capsule in the valley floors of the reserves, and the indigenous endemic species of this area actually are still there in the ground, which creates an exciting time capsule to unlock and to realise the return of the reserves to their pre-1840s Ngāhere state. Another key aspiration is to reinstate the presence of the children of Ranginui and Papa Tuanuku, to return lines of sight to Hikanui Pā, Te Mata and the plains, and to install cultural markers and enable cultural education. This is a very brief summary of 52 cultural aspirations. Those 52 cultural aspirations don't all sit within this Reserves Act process. Some of them sit across stormwater, some of them sit across the district plan, and within the actual reserve management plan itself. So what we've experienced is that this cultural aspirations process actually allows mana whenua to go quite wide. Within this process, I've captured those 52 cultural aspirations, and I have classified them under 6 te aranga principles that allow us to understand the cultural aspirations a bit deeper and how we can realise them. Also placing an unofficial KPI on ourselves to ensure that no cultural aspiration is left behind. Some of those cultural aspirations won't be achieved within this reserve management plan, but are achievable over time, such as returning the reserves to their pre-1840s state. Moving on, please, key mana whenua areas of work, working with Dr. Galen Carter to complete an archaeological management plan for the registration of Wahiwa District Plan and Pohetanga Heritage New Zealand. The archaeological sites are currently registered with the Archaeological Association and therefore do come under protective mechanisms with Heritage New Zealand, but the cultural landscape is still yet to be protected. There is currently a stormwater resource consent renewal underway, which allows for integration of the waterways with the reserves and with the aspiration for their pre-1840s Ngāhere state. A pre-1840s Ngāhere planting plan and cultural guidance for care groups is required. There are some wonderful care groups working in these reserves. They do want to plant Indigenous native plants, and they do want to know more about the cultural landscape. And there is a wonderful opportunity for mana whenua to provide that cultural guidance so that what the care groups are doing is in line with that aspiration of returning the reserves to their pre-1840s forested state. So if we can move on, this next slide is, we call this the London Tube Map. These reserves are unusual in that with the presence of Hikanui Pā and no protective mechanisms over those sites at the moment, with the exception of Heritage New Zealand, our colleague in our Pouahurea team, Wilson Pearce, has pulled together this regulatory framework so that we can create pathways for the realisation of these cultural aspirations. And like a tube map, we do choose colours and we follow those colours to create journeys. And for an example, moving forward, this next one, if you could move forward, please. This slide here shows the journey that we would take for the Heretaunga Takoto Claims Settlement Act, and acknowledging that they have statutory acknowledgements over these waterways and how we can help to shape up their involvement within this reserve space. Moving on, please. The red line here, the red tube line, is around the stormwater consent and how we can add in any of the appropriate cultural aspirations to stormwater consent, and what our critical pathway of work would be within that program of work. This tube line here is around where the actual cultural aspirations sit within the context of the Māori Community Development Act and how they interrelate with the Archaeological Management Plan required through the Heritage New Zealand Act, and how that interrelates with the Reserves Act and stormwater. Moving on, please. And finally, this diagram here pulls together the Reserves Act, the district plan, and how we would go about registering and acknowledging some of the sites within the reserve space. So we do this behind the scenes with our colleagues to show them how we can achieve the cultural aspirations that have been provided by mana whenua and where they all sit, because when it comes to Māori regulatory frameworks, it can become confusing, and our role within Council is to make it clear and to provide clarity so we have clear pathways to achieve aspirations. Moving on, please. This view here is of Hikanui Reserve. We've done a walk through Hikanui Reserve. This reserve, while small, opens up a lot of opportunity for participation of mana whenua in this space. There are currently no care groups in this space, so it does open up an opportunity for mana whenua to participate and do something very special in this space. Moving on, Tauroa Reserve does have a care group. They're doing really well. When we walked through there, we could sense that there was a strong association of the care group as ahika in this space, which is wonderful. Moving on, please. Tana Reserve is used more for families. There are mature fruit trees in here, and it is in a denser urban area with high foot traffic, and for a lot of young mums with their babies, it's easy to access and walk through and enjoy. So where are we heading? Well, we have key themes and concepts that have been developed with Rebecca Offamuskil, and I'll hand it over now to Alex to complete the presentation inclusive of Frimley and Eskdale. The next action for Tainui and Hikanui Pā is to have a design wānanga on site to have a look at the cultural landscape and to identify those view shafts that are required within the reserve management plan and to start creating some cultural connectivity through the 4 reserves, inclusive of cultural markers and the aspiration to return them to their pre-1840 state. Before I do hand over to Alex, could I answer any questions at this point?
No, kare e pātai. Kia ora. Yeah, I think Hikanui, all those, that reserves, especially because of the wahi tapu there, be important to get that wānanga hapu ne, because, we all have relationships with that maunga and that side. So, just the one question, te whānau o Heipora, ko ai rātou?
Uncle Mara, you might be best placed to answer that question if you're still online.
Sure. If you have a look at the marriage that came from Te Haipora to Te Hapuku, and of course it dropped down to their only son, Karanema, who unfortunately passed away, but Te Arahi, and what follows is a culmination of marriage, which principally stems from the tipuna over the overlaying block, which has been identified in the major report for Te Mata, Te Karanima, Te Mataoro Mokako. So therefore, this particular outline, insofar as the Karanima Reserve has been an outstanding issue, which unfortunately had not been resolved throughout the extent of the Heretaunga Takoto settlements, to the satisfaction of the claimants. Mary Jones, who's the daughter of, oh God, Jenna's got her face in my mind. One of, not Amor. Anyway, she's a director, along with Kenneth Jones. They along with Mediana Wycliffe, a huge contingent of our Tanahu family, have been driving this particular one. Mediana passed away. It's being left with the whānau still seeking redress over this outstanding issue. So it's been vitally important that when we start to establish the notion of aspirations, that one, the whakapapa of these whānau are very much included, and of course potentially in some way, even though treaty settlements clearly sits outside of an RMA framework, that's been made clear with the invitation to enable some of those descendants, such as Mary, to participate around the discussions to date, and also I think feel comfortable in terms of the outcome that's enabled at least some of those 42 recommendations. Is it 42? 52. To be 52 to be shaped up with their participation. So Mary Jones, very much part of the Mohi family. Charles, help me out here. I've forgotten her mum. One of your aunties, sits right in amongst all of our mohi whānau from Pakipaki. So that's who. That's,
I got the gist of those whānau lines now. Yeah, choice.
Auntie Dixie,
Auntie Dixie. Oh yeah. Oh.
Yeah, Dixie. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kapai. Rob, you comment, question?
I know you answered the question you asked, or you asked the question that I just wanted to ask. And is Uncle still there? He'll have some commentary around that, just making sure that, as Mare explained, that the whakapapa lines are looped in. And I'm sure Uncle, who's also of that line, should be part of that process. That was all.
Yeah, kapai. Ko wehe wawe Uncle. So, ko haere ia. But yeah, no, definitely that marriage between Hapuku and Haipura, yeah. Kia ora. Okay.
Might I just add that I guess the perception of the whānau, particularly the claimants, have another way to, get themselves up the iho whakapapa line. So that has come as part of the contention in terms of the marriage, bringing those in. So had to be, and boy, I take an inclusive approach pretty much insofar as, because look, just don't want to have the to even split us up more. So that's the delicate nature of having to facilitate these discussions, taking an inclusive approach in amongst everyone, or those particularly that see quite a diverse, line lineage that they prefer to go on to. Anyway, it's worked out so far.
Yeah, mara mana, that sensitivity. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. Would we be able to have the next slide, please? So, as Charles has outlined earlier, we undertook extensive research and consultation last year, and we are about to release this document, which is basically bringing together all of that work and summarising it in this themes and concepts document. Next slide, please. So our first step on the review of this management plan last year was to engage a research consultancy to undertake our consultation. The focus of the review started off very much focused on the walking and cycling trails within this network of reserves, plus also exploration of the cultural aspirations. So this slide summarises the consultation, simply the consultation, and found that people love the reserves, the natural oasis experience they can have through walking and cycling, opportunities for connections, and also the fact that the PA was located within Tainui Reserve. Feedback on improvements was around extending the mountain bike trail network, improving maintenance, improving relationships between user groups, increased native planting, and litter reduction and signage were some of the key themes that came through. And the opportunities out of that consultation was again around completion of the mountain bike trail network, building relationships between groups, defining a bike jumps area, signage improvements, and also learning about Hikanui Pa, as well as more native planting. Next slide, please. As well as the community consultation, we also engaged various specialist reports. So an arboricultural report from Paper Street Tree Company assessed trees across the reserves and made recommendations for their for short-term and long-term management. The Cultural Aspirations report, which Charles has discussed in detail. A historical report from Michael Fowler, which dated from approximately 1850s to the present day, which talks about the land acquisition during that time. And an archaeological report prepared by Archaeology Hawke's Bay, which found that there was some degradation around the PA site, which needed proactive management. Next slide, please. And so bringing it all together, the key themes on the left-hand side there are recognising and protecting the cultural heritage of the reserves, retaining the peaceful and natural character of the reserves, maintaining the opportunity to walk, cycle, walk dogs and play in nature in the reserves, and ensuring the reserves continue to be a place to connect and where all members of the community are welcome. So we're taking those themes, and we're now in the process of developing the draft management plan, which will include policies for the management of the reserves over the next 10 years, a timeframe for various for capital expenditure during that time, and this will be prepared in draft, which will then be released for consultation later this year. So the concepts in particular that we're looking at, based on all that research and consultation that was undertaken last year, are establishing a clear mountain bike trail network across the reserves, provision of a jumps area, vehicle parking, specific archaeological management of the PA site, tree management, which supports the cultural aspirations, waterway improvements, weed and pest control, defining dog and on and off-lead areas, improving facilities and signage improvements. Those are quite general concepts. As I say, we're investigating these at the moment. Am I beginning to hurry up?
Well, yes. I'm wrapping you up.
Alrighty.
I'm wrapping you up. But
so,
yeah,
do you
wrap
want
it
me
up.
to stop here?
Yeah. Gee, eh? 2 minutes?
2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, you're on. So
Well, 3 minutes. Yeah,
we're running we're running 3 management plan processes concurrently. So along with the Havelock Reserves, we're also looking at Eastdale Park and Frimley Park. So just a quick run through the Eastdale Park slides. It's located off State Highway 5 north of Napier. There's currently one area of the park which is publicly accessible and the other area which is leased for grazing. Next slide, please. It's an image of the park. Next slide, please. Esk River runs on the left-hand side there. And next slide, please. And this management plan is triggered by the lease undertaken by the Hawke's Bay Mountain Bike Club to use the Panpack land on the other side of Esk River for new trails, and they have an interest in creating an access point from Eskdale Park. So while no application has been received by council, that interest triggered this management plan process. If you could skip the next. Again, we're undertook the consultation and engaged various specialist reports. And if you skip on to the next slide, and then that's just a summary of the consultation. And the next slide. Again, so we engaged in archaeological report and broad cultural report, and we've also been speaking with Te Tai Whenua o Te Whanganui o Arotu, thank you, and Manga Haruru Trust, Tangatu Trust to prepare cultural impact assessments for the reserve. And next slide. And these are, again, the themes and the concepts, which is really about making what's there better, and with more planting, better play equipment, and investigating the access point to the mountain bike park. And again, it's a concept which is being investigated at the moment with a number of specialist reports that need to be investigated to see if that is feasible.
Can I take the last 30 seconds?
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the last 30 seconds of our presentation, we will send out these key themes which have been finalised by our team this week, and we'll email them out to you. The last reserve management plan is Frimley Park. Frimley Park, what we have found through Frimley Park is that there is a paleo channel that runs through the park, which a paleo channel is the archaeological remnants of a river. And this river is the Mākaramu. And I've been doing cultural mapping, and the identification of this paleo channel in Frimley Park by Dr. Galen Carter has allowed us to complete the cultural mapping and identify the course of the Mākaramu, which has been a really pleasant surprise off the back of the research for this Frimley Park. So that allows us to complete cultural mapping and identify those former wetlands and waterways that our people used. So that's a wonderful way to finish off on a high note with this process. The key themes are being finalised by our team, and we will send them out to this committee this week. Kia ora.
Tēnā kōrua. Thank you for that report on our reserves in Havelock and in Hastings. And in Te Whanganui Aorotu, Eskdale. And do you have a patai?
Yeah, kia ora, Chair. I'd just like, as the Chair of Parks and Reserves, I'd just like to thank the team very much for all their hard work. It's been immense, the amount of work that's gone into these reserves management plans. So thank you, and I'd like to move the recommendations.
We've got a mover, seconder. Your worship, all those in favour, ki mai ai. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Passed. So we've got item 8, which is the Wahiwa review. And Wilson, you're online, Wilson? Oh, yep, ka tukanatu te raka ki a koe hoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui, Mr. Chair. During the last Heretaunga Takoto Noa meeting, Rowan Wallace and I delivered a report that council officers are beginning the process for a Section 16 review, Wahiwa and sites of significance, and that we would be seeking guidance from the committee on engagement and measures to make this process more user-friendly for mana whenua. During the previous plan changes to this section, the process has been driven by council. However, mana whenua engagement to register sites was minimal during these reviews. So council's recognised a need to partner with mana whenua, not only as experts in this field, but also as those who are kaitiaki of such sites. To achieve the requirement under the RMA, council needs to build trust with mana whenua and partner to ensure co-construction of the pathway to adequate site protection. So in regards to this, officers are seeking input from the committee on this matter, recognising the necessity to engage with mana whenua at all levels. However, we are seeking guidance on this. Should officers be engaging in initial kōrero with hapu directly from the offset, or should initial discussions occur with tai whenua and PSGEs, with further discussions with hapu facilitated by both mana whenua entities and council as the entity responsible for registering those sites in our district plan. Officers are also seeking endorsement from the committee on the undertaking inclusion of a Te Ao Māori worldview into the district plan. This inclusion will also support the understanding around sites by providing context around how Māori see connectivity between living and non-living elements of the environment, and guidance is sought on where the interpretation of Te Ao Māori should be sourced. Is it appropriate that the Po Ahurea team undertake this, or should outside assistance be sought? Another measure for mana whenua support in this process is whether or not we should be generating a template to support mana whenua in recognising the evidence that will be required for this process. So during the 2016 plan change, Maunga Tangitu Trust submitted a large number of files. So working alongside them, we believe we could be able to create an appropriate exemplar, which could be used to show the mana whenua experience through the registration process during the 2016 review, and speak to their experiences with the process. So Maunga Tangitu Trust had 2 levels of confidentiality, or had 2 levels of site registration. They had sites which were public, and these can be viewed on our district maps. So when anyone is going to apply for a resource consent application, these sites are visible on all of our planning maps and they can be seen. However, they were also successful in having a number of sites registered under confidentiality agreements. So under that, entire properties where these Wahitonga sites are registered, they have an overlay on the entire property. So that is an indicator for council officers that we need to refer the applicant to mana whenua to engage. And then in this case, Maunga Tangitu Trust, they hold all of the information and evidence that is in support of those sites, and council doesn't have the ability to share any of that information with landowners. So we are seeking whether it is appropriate or not for council officers to work on generating a template which can be used for further registration by other mana whenua groups, such as PSGEs, Tai Whenua, Hapu, and Marae.
All right, kia ora Wilson. Anyone want to comment on that? I'd just say aye to pretty much everything you said. You know, it just makes good logic to involve hapu, PSGEs and tai whenua when going out to work with our people, but also having a template, because I've seen what you have to do to kind of register these things. It's quite a lot of work. So having a template from Maunga Haruru would be awesome. Māori.
Kia ora, thank you for that, and thank you for that report as well. Thank you as well, Wilson. You know, what's really worked, and I just want to start from this point, of course, has started really around the Craggy Range debacle with the tracks, and of course what then happened was it identified certain capacity gaps, particularly within council, and have long come, we've supported, of course, Wilson in his role, and it's been a really good arrival in amongst the scene that we have today, along with you two as well, Charles. So, and it strengthens the ability capacity with in-house for you, James. I agree too as well, Baden, that, you know, I mean, the problem with Hapu authorities is there's probably none in the phone book at the moment. They're still evolving as part of this. So, you've got the PSGE linkages. Luckily, fortunately, you've arrived into being in both camps, Tania, Taipinua, PSGE. We're working soundly in a relationship forming with our HTST, which provides an ability for both Tamatea area, which is probably Pukeho, where the line ends anyway, but that's your marae, James, to kind of pick it up with that communication in mind. So, really support that co-construction, as you've mentioned, is really, really important in order to get this really long process that's being mentioned going. It's been 13 years since this item got picked up with, and I think Tanya, you gave some expression of that. Now here we are. There are a number of recommendations that have come through a number of different processes that are just waiting for a plan change to kind of move this along. The activator, of course, is where we are, waiting for this to occur. I just say, let's get on with it. In terms of Te Ao Māori, and for the time being, you've got inside of the district plan a reference that's made to cultural intellectual property that sits in this one whole te whātau te reonga. And of course, that really underpins the sincerity of both cultural intellectual property not going on to the public domain. And that to me has been a very significant new way of approach when undertaking cultural aspirations, cultural impacts, assessments and so forth. And so I just want to commend where we've gotten to in terms of James's team and having to facilitate exactly this new way, so that when we get contributions from our whānau, our kaumātua, and are really, really iffy about their contribution actually going out into the public domain, that we've actually got processes we look really hard in council that there are. So tautoko everything that's been said in terms of confidentiality and silent files. I mean, it's great that Maunga Heretaunga 2 Trust have actually got a good template. And as you say, it is a minefield kind of going through application forms. And there are differences of definition that are held by, and it's really important that I think the District Council puts out its definition too as well at the front end, what we term to be defined as wahitapu, because it's quite different when you start to pick that up. New Zealand Pohetanga Trust and others that are in the space. Kia ora.
Just quickly through you, Chair. In our district plan, the section is referred to as Wahitonga. So we don't use the term wahitapu because wahitapu are included in that. So it allows a bit more flexibility in the interpretation of what the site could be.
Oh boy. Thank you, Wilson, for that report. We're got recommendations there. Who wants to move and second them? Moved by Mare, seconded by Tanya. All those in favour, ki mai ai. Aye. Aye. Any against? Carried. Ngā mihi. Kia tātou. So we're going to move on to the last item here. This is the environmental state of the environment report. Jen, you got a few minutes there, brother?
Yep.
Kia ora, kei aho.
Kia ora koutou. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the platform and standards set by the previous reporting officers. The indicators that you see before you in the completed state of environment were formed by these previous officers. And secondly, I'd like to acknowledge the current staff for their contribution to this document. Without these staff and their expertise, I wouldn't have been able to collate these. That's my little mihi for you. As a result of the 14th of December full council meeting, the 2015-19 State of Environment report was adopted. One of the recommendations was to report this document to the Heretaunga Takoto Noa Māori Standing Committee, along with the Rural Community Board. One of the changes that we've made to this document was removing the indicators that were part of the regional council. Reason being that reduced duplication. As you can see, the document's long as it is. So by having regional council, which are also required to do the state of the environment, it just made it easier for us to report on our functions, what we do within HDC. That's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Any pātai? Gotta go?
Just a quick one, thanks.
Oh, yep. Yeah, go Māori.
That report, yes, I know that we do have some overlaps, particularly around Havelock Karami stream that still come into the district council's, I guess, jurisdiction of authority. Is that correct? Or, you know, it's just examples of that. And if you're going to separate out state of environment, but you have a responsibility, I guess, over certain parts would be good. Sorry, I haven't got my report in front of me. Is that correct?
Yeah, there are parts where it is function of the regional council, as well as my understanding is council does have input into the running of these streams. But like with your regional council stuff, that's your air quality, your water quality, your coastal.
Oh, right.
Those are the type of indicators that we've removed because they already report on it.
Okay.
Just reduces that.
Pātai anō. Okay, we'll
Happy to move.
Happy with the recommendation?
Happy to move report.
Mike's moving, seconded by Anne. All those in favour, keep my eye. Aye. Any against? Motion carried.
Finished on time.
Yeah. Koira tā tātou nei hui e homa. Tēnā koutou ngā kōrero ko puta mai a tātou i tēnei rangi. Kua tutuki a tātou enei kaupapa nui whakahirahira. Nō reira, ki te wāhi ki a tātou nei te uti tēnei huihuinga, nō reira mihi nei ki a tātou, and tukuna atu te raka ki a koe, Charlie.
Tēnā tātou, today is Ash Wednesday and the start of Lent. Pope Francis has called the world to pray for peace. Everything that's happening in our world today, we do pray for peace. We pray for peace around the world, in Ukraine, and we pray for peace in our own country, in Wellington. Pope Francis has asked us to pray for leaders. We pray for you as the leaders of our district, Mana Whenua, Kaunihera. Pope Francis has asked that we have courage in our political leadership and that we consider humanity and its compassion towards each other and towards the environment. Nō reira kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki o Hehu Kraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, mo ake tonu ake, āmine.
Āmine, āmine ki a tātou. Hei kona, hei konei. Āmihi.
Kia ora tātou.